Hello, and welcome back to Copilot Learning Hub. Today, we have an awesome episode for all of you devs out there and aspiring developers. We have a fantastic set of tools that I am so excited to share with you, and the best person who's going to come and teach us is our good friend, Anthony Bartolo. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Donna. It's awesome to be here.
All right, Anthony, tell everyone who you are and what you do.
So, as you said, Anthony Bartolo, I am a Microsoft developer advocate, specifically concentrating around developer tools and how do we take people's ideas and make them real through Microsoft's AI and cloud services.
Now, you've been in the dev space for a very long time, as have I. We've had intense conversations about how can we speed up the developer's journey so they can get to the hard problems rather than fixating on the same problems we've had for 20-something years. I hear you've got a pretty cool suite of tools to share with us today.
Oh yeah, the whole advent of AI has really pushed the envelope in terms of the way that we can implement ideas into the cloud and into people's hands to accomplish what they need to accomplish. The one thing to keep in consideration is AI is a co-pilot. It enables you, it pushes you forward. It doesn't replace you. It allows you to take on tasks that predominantly you would search on Bing how to do the next thing. It provides you the insight in terms of what next steps would be. But in no certain case is it the lead or the actual developer. It's always going to follow by your instructions. And so that's what we're going to show today, specifically inside of Visual Studio Code, utilizing GitHub Copilot.
Okay, this I'm dying to see because I know how to use GitHub Copilot in VS, kind of. But I have a feeling you've got stuff to show us that brand new, hot off the presses, things that maybe none of us have seen. So please, tell us, enlighten us.
So let me share my screen. And we're going to go through a couple examples. Now, I've known Donna for a while. I know she is a serial entrepreneur, always looking at the best ways to create new things to excite people, which is awesome. I wish it was just as easy to do that in dev, but let me show you a quick example. And I'll assure you, I've seen this numerous times for individuals doing exactly this. So here's my Visual Studio Code IDE. As you can see here, I have GitHub Copilot chat onboarded. This is my chat window that's here. Here's where I would provide my instruction set in terms of, hey, what are we trying to accomplish? And what do you need me to do? And so let's go in here, and I'm going to put in something specifically for Donna. Build me an application that will be a bestseller on Marketplace and make me $1 million a month in revenue.
I love.
Can you imagine if it was that easy?
That would be incredible.
Next.
Okay, I want to know what happens though.
Sorry, I can't assist you with that.
Oh.
Why? We talked about this, right? Copilot is a copilot. It is not the pilot. You can't write the application for you. You have to come forward with the idea. You have to be able to provide it the ability to understand what are you trying to accomplish. When we're doing prompt engineering in any platform, you want to know, that your prompt is short, it is simple, and it is specific. Having something as general as build me an application and not providing instruction on what that application is makes no sense. And so the Copilot doesn't understand what that is. And so it comes up with a response. I'm sorry, I can't, assist with that. Let's say we take it a step further and say, build me an application. Let's be more specific in Python. That will be a bestseller in the marketplace. I'll click on that. And guess what? It's going to come up with the same thing, saying, sorry, I can't assist with that. But look what it does provide. It provides an additional suggestion. What are some popular Python libraries for developing web applications? It's now trying to inquire of you, give me better next steps. Let me provide you with some suggestions of what we could talk about in the midst of building out this application. So it recognizes that you want to build an app in Python, still doesn't know what type of app you want to build, but it's going to try to give you ideas in terms of what you can do and what your next steps would be.
I like this a lot because it's actually trying to push you to prompt better.
So let's take it to the next step. So let's, we're going to build an app. We're going to build the next best game available, and it's going to be called tic-tac-toe, right? So let's go in and say, okay, build me a tic-tac-toe game in Python. So now it's going to go and, yeah, sure, here's a simple way to build a tic-tac-toe game in Python. Oh, so, and here's a great other thing that it's showcasing. Sorry, this response matched public code. It takes in consideration open source code. So if there's a scenario where, you are working on private code and you're asking Copilot to provide the information for you, it'll actually, if it's invoked by your organization, restrict you from using that publicly sourced code inside of your private code for this type of implementation. So let's close this for a second.
Hey, there's a security thing. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. See, I knew I'd learn some new things today. That's great. Yeah.
So let's start up a new file, right? And we'll start up a new file. We'll start up a Python file. And you know what? We don't even need this chat. I'm going to do right into the IDE window, the developer window. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to write the same command I did before. Build me a tic-tac-toe game in Python. So now I'm doing it directly into the programming window, and there you go. It's spitting out the game for me.
Oh, wow.
Now, you can see that it didn't block me this time in terms of the code. Why? Because this is a net new file. So prior to, it didn't know if it was adding it to a new file or not. And so to protect itself, sorry, you can't add that code to an existing or a private corporately owned code because it's open source, right? Now in this scenario here, I have this in my ID. This is a brand new code. I'm doing this as a hobby. I built a tic-tac-toe game. And you know what? So GitHub Copilot has made changes. I'm going to accept the changes. And here's my game. So I can go actually and run this.
That's very interesting how it wouldn't create it in an existing project because you don't have the right permissions to add open source code, but it will in a new one because you do have permissions to create something new. That's fantastic.
Correct, because you're creating something net new, right? And there's no policy attached to this file yet, right? There's no governance or security that's been implemented. Now I have this tic-tac-toe game. As you can see here, the output is in ASCII, and I didn't even give that specification. It did that on its own, guessing, hey, you know what? This is probably the best way to do this. Enter a position from 1 to 9, and you and I can actually play tic-tac-toe. So everybody goes for 5 to start. And it does the graphical representation in ASCII, in there, and it's a full-on game, right? So, and what's great about it too is that Copilot even went ahead and added its comments so that you can understand, okay, here's all the things that you need to know in terms of what, if you want to change anything, all the comments are there. What if the comments weren't there and you didn't know what that functionality did? You can actually go and select this, and we hit the Control-I again, and you hit the slash commands. And there's a bunch of slash commands, as you can see, that /docs, /explain, /fix, /tests. I'm going to go to /explain, and I'm going to get it to explain to me in the chat, what does that section of code actually do? This comes in handy when you're inheriting code that has no comments attached to it.
Right.
And so it goes through and it can actually provide you, hey, this is the Python code that builds out the board, right, for your game. There's a lot that's coming through there, as you can see, but you can read this in terms of what the formula is in terms of how the board is set up so that, hey, you know what? I don't want to do a 3x3 board. I want to make it harder. I want to do a 4x4 or 6x6 board. I want to make it more challenging. If you take it a step further, I want to remove the ASCII and I actually want to do graphical images and I want to have, graphical representation. These are all the things that you can do with this solution that Copilot could help you with. In past, you would use something like Bing to say, hey, how do I do this? Now, the challenge with that is it's disconnected, right? Because you're doing it in a browser, and then you would come back, copy and paste, and fingers crossed the code works. And most times it doesn't because it doesn't know the context of what you're building.
Right.
The power of Copilot in the fact that you're harnessing AI is it's understanding the code that you're building out, and it's taking that code and putting it into its knowledge base and say, okay, well, they're trying to build an application that's going to play tic-tac-toe. This is, they want to add on graphical representation now. So let's remove the ASCII board and let's help them build out the code to make it so it's much more visually appealing. The other aspect to this is testing, right? Donna, when you're building your applications, how often are you testing your apps, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I worked in accessibility for a while, and one of the biggest challenges was, how do you test this for accessibility? And it was always this humongous project, like go find these laws, generate these 10 test cases, run them, what's right, what's wrong. That is one area that I think is like grossly underserved, just the testing industry in general. And I have so much faith in GitHub Copilot being able to help with that.
So let's go jump into another scenario, and I'm going to do testing now.
Yeah.
And I'm jumping into what we call a code space.
Okay.
And I love these. These are developer containers. What's great about this is you can see it's loading up right now. It's used in the cloud.
Yeah.
So I don't have the IDE. I don't have VS Code on my machine. I do, but in this scenario here, I don't. I've been forwarded this code for this HTML site. It's JavaScript backend. And what's great about it is I have all my linters, my what coding we're using, my code spaces. Everything is loaded in here. It's accessible through the web, through my browser, and it looks like VS Code. It's almost identical. And so I can go in here and I can go and see, all my applications and make the changes as required. And this is interesting. What is this all about? Why is this asking for site prompts? And who is Alexandria and all this information? So let's go in here, and the same way we did before, in terms of asking, explain.
Oh, look at this.
It is identical to what you have inside of Visual Studio Code natively installed on your machine. It's now providing me the output in terms of, well, what is that piece in terms of what we're doing? Because it lacks documentation in terms of this application, right? I've seen this time and time again. I inherit this information. I inherit this code. I've been asked to modify it. I don't know what the code does. So let's go in here now, and let's tell us what it is.
Okay, so this is the most common use case for all of us. We don't write code from scratch. We inherit code.
Correct.
And sometimes we inherit code written before we were born. Looking at you, Windows team, right? It's a real thing.
Oh, if you're a COBOL developer, you're probably retired right now.
Yeah.
I've heard of a hydro company out in Eastern Canada that is using Copilot to help with the development of the hydro machines, generating the electricity, all built in COBOL, and they're using Copilot to help them advance the abilities of the machinery through that code set. So for future now, what I'm going to do is this. For the next person that looks at this code, we're going to automate the documentation on the code. Right. So this is a really cool tool too, as well. We're going to go through and automate the documentation on this code to say, well, okay, what does this mean? And so as you can see, it's telling me what the properties are being represented. So if I have to make changes in future, I know that, the name is the name of the site owner, the title is the title of the site owner, email contact, on and on and on, so that I know that I can go in and make those changes on the fly as required because the documentation exists and tells me that I can do that and provides me that information. The other aspect to that is, as we talked about, is the testing piece. So let's go in here and we'll select that, and we're going to say test.
What? You can just say test? I did not know that either.
And now it'll go through and it'll actually write the test code to render your image to test to make sure that the code works.
Okay, this is new. I was doing in the chat, give me 10 test cases, but this is so much better.
Well, let's go through all the slash commands that are available, right? So I can't show every single one in here. So we talked about slash explain. We've talked about slash tests. There's slash fix. How many times have you gone through looking for that semicolon that you forgot to put?
Yep.
And hey, I need to add it into my code. I need to find out where it is. You highlight the code that's causing the issue. You do slash fix, and it will provide you the suggestions in terms of where the code break is and what needs to be inserted.
Okay, that is cool.
If you are a Jupyter Notebooks developer and you're doing machine learning and calculations, what have you, you can set up a new notebook by slash new notebook, and it brings up the notebook specifically to address your data for the application that you're writing. Okay,
that is so cool for all of the folks who are now starting to get into machine learning, and they may come from different industries or different programming languages, and they're like, what is a Jupyter Notebook? And just getting people started with that's magical. I like that.
And so the benefit of this is, as I mentioned, right, it's a co-pilot. It's not a pilot. It's there to help you. It's there to serve you. It's there to understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to develop. It does need the prompts to be short, simple, and specific. And I always add the fourth S, when in doubt, slash it out, the slash commands that are available to you in regards to simplifying what you're trying to accomplish. I love the fact that it knows all the code that you're producing, what the ideas and the structure of what you're trying to build, and provides you the suggestions specific to what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so many people go to search engines like Bing
Mm-hmm.
and try to, copy and paste what they find,
Mm-hmm.
and they find it doesn't work. And they have to do a whole bunch of investigation work in terms of how to correct that. This being embedded into your IDE, specifically Visual Studio Code, it is that, forcing factor to really understand what you're trying to accomplish and to provide you the best suggestions to finish the project that you're trying to complete. And today we're going to be talking about, GitHub Copilot for Visual Studio. So it's not just Visual Studio Code that can harness Copilot. Visual Studio also has that capability. And what's great about it is if you run both, I've done it where you get that idea in the middle of the night, you pull up your laptop and you're typing away really quickly. I've done it numerous times in VS Code. And then later on, I want to transfer into Visual Studio. You have that ability to access Copilot inside of Visual Studio like you would in Visual Studio Code to continue on your work and to continue on what you're building out. We showed scenarios in VS Code in terms of the harnessing of Copilot. We're going to do the same inside of Visual Studio. It's going to be a little bit different because Visual Studio is a little bit different, right? It is more extensive in terms of developer tools, but you're going to see that a lot of the functionality is actually very similar in terms of what you can accomplish with Visual Studio and GitHub Copilot.
Okay, that sounds amazing because I know a humongous audience who use Visual Studio and have for 20 years. And now they're able to supercharge it using the power of GitHub Copilot and the power of AI. And I know they're very, very, very anxious to see what you've got for us.
So as we talked about before, right? In the past, you're going to a search engine like Bing, you're doing a search of how do I add X, how do I, do Y. Most times you're also looking at, hey, I have existing code. I don't know what this code does. The scary thing is people are taking that code and putting it into ChatGPT and telling it, can you tell me what this does, right? Everything that goes into ChatGPT then becomes public domain. And that's the scary thing about all this. The beauty of Copilot means it's running for you inside of your IDE. It only shares that information with you under corporate license, right? In respect to what you're doing. Now, remember, there are different licenses available for Copilot. One's private through corporate, and one is public domain. In this scenario here, we're showing the private one that specifically looks at your code. It doesn't share out that information. And it has a similar block in terms of what we saw with Visual Studio Code, that if you're trying to import open source code into your corporate environment, corporate application, it will block that to say, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be incorporating that code.
I love that security factor is there both in VS Code and Visual Studio. That was new information for me, but it's very, very smart because it's such an ask from companies saying, we don't want our intellectual property to be impacted by other people's intellectual property if we're working on not an open source project. So I love that. I love that it's in both of these products.
So let's jump right into the demo, and I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you my implementation here of Visual Studio. So here is code I've inherited, right? So I work for a weather company, and they are using this code to display out, how the weather is doing in my area. We have no snow today in Toronto, which is awesome. It's actually a warm day outside. And so here's all this code. No documentation. I don't know what any of this does. What we're going to do is let's select and start deducing what's going on. So I'm going to select here, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to ask Copilot, stop me if you've seen this one already. Explain. So the slash commands are identical from VS Code. So if you're doing this in VS Code, you can do this inside of Visual Studio. And so it goes through.
You can do slash commands in Visual Studio. Did not know that.
You got it. So same thing, and it shows you the breakdown step by step of what this data does. So it gets the map data for the weather forecast, pulls in the information, the block generates the forecast code to display. And what's great about this is what do you want to do next? So it's trying again to figure out what are your next steps on what you're trying to accomplish. How can I modify this code to generate a forecast for the next 10 days instead of 5? How can I add more weather summaries to the summaries array? Well, guess what? I was asked to do a 10-day instead of a 5-day forecast for the output. So let's click on that. And so now it's going to provide me with the solution of what I need to modify.
Oh.
So here on the left is the original.
Yep.
And on the right is the suggested. As you can see, it's changing the range from 5 to 10. And I can click on accept. And now my code has been changed. So now I have a 10-day forecast instead of a 5-day.
Okay, I love that. I love that diff where you could see it and say, is this what I want, yes or no? I think that's really, really clever because then you get to make the choices. Again, you as the main person, not the Copilot, not autopilot, et cetera. You're able to say, yep, this is what I want, especially for this code base that you have no idea what it does because you inherited it. So that's fabulous.
So let's take it to the next step now. And I'm going to ask Copilot, same like we did on the other solution, document. So now it's going to go through and understand, okay, the selected text, summary retrieves the weather forecast and returns an array of weather forecast objects. Perfect. And the same thing, it shows the diff screen in terms of what the changes are. I'm going to accept. And there's my comments.
Oh, okay. I love that explain functionality so much because it's probably the thing I use the most, honestly, because working in legacy code bases, half of the time it's, what in the heck were you thinking? And I know someone meant to go and write comments, and of course they moved on to the next thing. And in a large organization, how much time do we spend inheriting code? All of it, all of it. I love that explain functionality works so great in line, so great in line.
So one more thing to show you, and I know you get excited about this too, is the /test command. So same like we had in VS Code, I can go in here and write a test for this code. And it spits it out. And so this is the test I can actually run to ensure that the forecasting will work for the code that's represented.
I love that it just writes it there in line. That is so interesting.
And you have to accept it, right? Yeah. It doesn't just do it, insert it, right? And so it provides that information in terms of, hey, you know what? That's cool. I can take this. I'm going to copy it and save it for another time, but I'm not going to implement it in my code. So I'll just click on cancel. And it takes it out. Now, it builds it out into its own program test so that you can run it from a separate window. But again, it's based on your code. So it's not going through, you going through a search engine to find out, okay, well, how do I write a test for this now? Copy, paste, right? Go into ChatGPT, copy, paste my code, which I've seen too many times, right? It's that whole thing where you're doing it inside of your IDE. If you have the corporate license for GitHub Copilot, it is secured to your organization, so it doesn't make it publicly available. And it allows you, with context, to understand what am I testing amidst my application.
I love this because you're staying away from the entire Stack Overflow search to ChatGPT pipeline, right? You're staying out of the whole thing. You're not taken out of your own context. You're in the tool that you're used to for 20-something years, and it just got a whole bunch of new superpowers to help you get to the actual fun part of your job rather than trying to understand this legacy code base that you got handed.
Now, like the VS Code, there is a Dev Cloud solution available for Visual Studio, and that's called DevBox. And the great part of DevBox is it's your Visual Studio in the cloud. You can also have Copilot implemented in that as well. It requires 0 install on your machine, and there's the ability to apply governance to DevBox for that implementation. So DevBox gives you that dev container in the cloud for the ability to access your Visual Studio that multiple people can share in terms of what you're working on together. The Copilot suggestions are individualized, so it would be specific to an individual's account on GitHub, and you would have the ability to make the changes to the code as required that you're allowed access to amidst the government's implementation.
Okay, I love that because you do have in the cloud version for Visual Studio, for all of the devs who have Visual Studio licenses, which is a humongous part of the world. And I've had a chance to use DevBox, and what I found so fascinating about it was how fast it was to set this up. It was 2 minutes, and I've got a copy of my DevBox ready to go to do, all these somewhat random experimental projects, or I'm, onboarded to some guest account, fix their issues, but I don't need this on my machine forever and ever and ever. But having Copilot be enabled for that, that's magical, because we got that feedback, right? Which is I got so used to Copilot on my main machine that not having it available in the shared workspace was brutal.
And that's the thing, it takes away the guesswork in terms of what do you have access to, right? The governance rules that are implemented into DevBox, if you're only allowed to work on the front end, that's what your access provides. If you're disallowed from the back end because there are some data sets that are secure and not everybody should have access to it, it has that availability as well. And then Copilot adheres to what you have access to. So if you are specifically working on the front end, you're asking questions of the front end, it's not going to provide you the access to the back end either, and will only provide you suggestions in terms of the code that you're working on specific to your environment.
I love that, because that's like your quote, air quotes, dev graph that you have access to. Yeah.
Yep.
I love it. This is fantastic, Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us. I did not know Visual Studio, that we've known for so long, had all of these cool tricks.
Oh, and there's more coming. I know that very soon you'll see a lot more announcements in terms of further integration of Copilot into Visual Studio to bring it that much more forward in the adoption of AI from a Copilot perspective, not a pilot perspective. You are still in the captain's chair in regards to where you're flying your application to, but Copilot will help you in terms of the navigation and how to ensure that the application is built the best way possible so that your end users really can achieve what they're trying to achieve amidst your app.
I love this. And what I really like, Anthony, about all of these demos is you actually do need to be a dev to be able to use GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio correctly. And it really helps those of us who've been doing this for a long time to do it faster, but it also helps those of us who are learning, say, a different language or inherited some code base, be able to do it, again, faster. So just it halves the learning curve. I think that's what I've taken away from this episode with you today. Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, this is awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony, so much for being with us. And to everyone else, tune in next time for another episode of Copilot Learning Hub. See you then.